Welcome. This is our monthly webinar, Knapsack. Today we're going to be focused on something we're putting out into the world, our advanced integration with Figma, which we just rolled out as a soft launch this week. So I'm Andrew. I lead strategy at Knapsack, and I'm joined by Evan.
Hey, everybody. Thanks for joining.
Shameless plug before we get into the today stuff. We've got a webinar coming up finally next month. Long awaited. Evan and longtime friend and colleague Brad Frost going to be digging into a topic we deal with a lot, especially in large, complex organizations, systems of systems, and specifically theming. There's been an explosion of functionality and thought in that space in the last 6 to 9 months. So really excited to dig into that. Please sign up on our site. All these events, webinars, live events are all available on our site. Speaking of live events, other shameless plug, we have been doing all of these design system leadership summits, and they've been so fantastic in helping bring communities like yours together, really focused more on you all sharing and learning from each other. We help facilitate it. We provide some happy hour and some snacks, and these have just been a really awesome series of events. So the next one is coming up here in just a few days in New York. April is after that. Those are sold out, but please check out our site and you can apply for May in Seattle, July in Portland. Our goal is to do these just about every month. So please reach out if you have any questions or apply, and we'll get you there. Awesome. So today's agenda is about our new Figma integration, right? So we want to give you a little bit of the context from a product standpoint of why a new Figma integration. And also dig into a little bit of the how. What are the ways that we're approaching this solution that we think are going to really make it super powerful and that we're already hearing are really yielding benefits. We'll get through the tactical stuff, do a little bit of a demo, share an idea of where we're going now that we've sort of cracked this open, and leave plenty of time for Q&A. Again, please drop your questions in the chat, in the Q&A as we go, and we will answer as many of them as we can. So why do we build a new Figma integration? I think there's really two core reasons behind this. One is a very common pain in the design system space, but I think that probably all of us in digital production have been living for a few decades now, which is all of the challenges that come from misaligned design and code, right? And this is inevitable, right? Like design and code are different. We have different teams working on them. We do our best to keep them aligned, but there's a lot of challenge in keeping them aligned, and the not realizing that things weren't aligned, that leads to misaligned expectations, right? And unfortunately, most teams realize that in QA, right? You've already spent a whole bunch of time, anchored expectations to design, built it in code, maybe even used all the right libraries on every side, and you come out to QA and people are surprised, right? And that's tough. Then we slow the projects down, we compromise releases, and we wasted a lot of time. And there's tension, right? We've all been in those trenches. So that's something that we've seen for a long time, right? And we saw an opportunity to, help resolve that. And then, part of this is also just we're always iterating on our platform, right? We've been evolving this for the years that we've been around, and we see an opportunity here to deliver with the foundation we already have, some really unprecedented alignment that we'll show you today in terms of what we can do with designers and engineers, an editing experience that's streamlined for our core contributor users that are using our platform. Really leaning in even more to this concept of the workshop and storefront, giving teams ways to work in protected areas and then really easily surface what they need to the right folks at the right time. And really the number one thing this brings is clarity, right? We've all had relationships, parent-child, or if you're helping someone troubleshoot a bug, especially, where we just don't really understand why we're not aligned or disconnected until we see what they're seeing, right? And that's really what this is about. How do engineers see what designers are looking at? How do designers see what engineers are looking at? And we can just get a lot of clarity and, have better process.
Not just what are the designers looking at, but like it gives the designers an opportunity to like curate what should be looked at, right? So it's about kind of being able to present that storefront and keeping kind of the messy workshop to the side. So instead of like, hey, here's access to my whole Figma file, just go diving in. It's more about let's show off like, these curated pieces, especially, in the world of design systems with like the components where it's obviously like, here is basically like the button and here it is, and it's all of its variations. And so being able to kind of curate that collection in a storefront is kind of something that is very helpful because it can be very disorientating just diving through someone's Figma file. So that's another reason that we think that that's why we want to make this and something that we think helps out.
And those Figma files are complex and nuanced, right? I'm sure they're not actually messy. No, they're just, there's a lot in there. So how are we going about solving for this, right? What's kind of going into this approach? So leaning into Figma's REST API, it's incredibly powerful, incredibly well documented. Gives us ability to really get tighter with the design assets and with the workspaces and organizations where you're working. It's just incredibly performant and stable. So it does a lot of things that help us deliver a smoother product experience. And as we'll get to when we talk about the roadmap, we've kind of cracked open this API, made some core integrations, and now we have a real foundation for scaling. There's a lot of opportunity here on how we bring our platforms even tighter. And a big part of that is, going beyond visual assets, right? Design in Figma yields a lot of data. Figma has done a lot to bring management and definition of design assets, particularly in systems, a lot closer to how things might work in code. Whether that's variables mapping loosely to CSS variables in code, or just the idea of defining props and having variants within your components in Figma, that gives us so much more to work with than just sending an artboard to engineers. So we're trying to go beyond those visual assets. So of course, you can pull those in as well, and actually create a little bit of more of a bridge. I think particularly when you think about things like handoff and just going from design to code, helping teams communicate really clearly around sort of the specification of what are the things I should be able to control in this, not just what are the ways it might look, and less to kind of infer in terms of how it should function. That's really powerful. And of course, having this clarity in Knapsack, just pairs really well with what you're going to get when you do get into the file. If you get in there, use things like dev mode and all the features, Figma's been focused on. And then, last part of this kind of strategy is really just trying to make the learning curve as simple as possible. Naming things is really, really hard, something that Evan has drilled into me. And Figma's done a lot of sort of benchmarking, if you will, in terms of names. And so we try to lean into common terminology, and really make this as easy as possible. If you're using things in Figma the way Figma intended, they'll flow in really nicely to how we've set things up in Knapsack. Cool. So what does it include? What we're going to show you here in a minute. So the ability to connect multiple design sources, as we call it, which today are Figma files, to the workspace. While you're editing, being able to browse all the components, frames, instances, different assets that are coming out of those Figma files. Be able to embed and configure those components and tiles, which are the content blocks we've set up, through your documentation. We'll show all the flexibility there, whether you're embedding essentially an image that I want to use that maybe in the past was a static, JPEG, and now instead you're going to use something feeding directly from Figma, or you want to actually do more of like a specification handoff. There's a lot of rich configuration. With those, you can build some cool experiences. We've got an MVP of an example where we can compare design and code, both at a data level and a visualization level. And then, this makes syncing really easy. You have one place to basically go and say, hey, I've done all my work in my workshop and my Figma file's up to date. Let me just have that feed into everywhere I've incorporated it throughout Knapsack. So really excited to get in and show you this. Let's do it. So here we have a Knapsack workspace. And so let me go ahead and open a branch. Everything in editing in Knapsack starts with a branch. And so once I do this, I will get my editing interface appearing here. You see I've got my add nav, etc. And the first place to go is into settings. And so now in our settings, we have this new integration section and the design sources. You'll see I already have a couple of different Figma files connected here, and it's extracting data in terms of letting me see how many components, how many frames, if I had instances of these components, which I don't in these particular files. And it also gives me the ability to go view that file in Figma, update it here once I make changes, or remove its connection from this workspace. And so I have a couple in here, but I want to show you the process from the start. So we're actually going to go over to Figma. This is our design system. This is Toby. You can actually, we'll share a URL. You can go check out the Toby design system in Knapsack. It's very, very meta. But let's get into an example component like a menu. So okay, we're not here to tell you how to organize your Figma files. We have, as you will see, a lot of components in this. This menu page has a lot of different menu related components. That's all well and good. Try not to make work for you there. What I'm going to do is go ahead and copy the link. And then I'm going to go over to Knapsack and add this. And you do need to have an active Figma session. You need to authenticate with Knapsack the first time you do it typically. You'll see that it now is authorized. I can do this, and I'm going to go hit add design source. And this will essentially import that file into my workspace here on the branch that I'm working in and give me the ability to start configuring it. So you see we have 381 components, no shame, 84 frames, again, no instances in this particular file, but let's get in now and show you what we can do. So we have some examples pre-built, but I want to show you essentially a new one, right? So let's go add a new page. I was doing the menu component is what I looked at. So I'm going to add that here. I can organize it. Maybe I'll put it under complex patterns. All right, so I don't have documentation for this right now. I'm just going to go and start to incorporate what's in Figma. So I have a few options here in our content block system, which is where you add all your content to Knapsack if you're not familiar. Lots of different types of sort of block-based editing. We're going to focus on the design ones here and put in, let's first put a design, a Figma component. And so if I wanted to do something like just get this page started, hand this off, maybe attached to a Jira ticket to engineering, probably be a common workflow. So I added that block and now I can go grab assets. These have the different Figma source files I've connected, as well as the ability to add a new one. And as you saw, I have 381, so I'm going to use our handy dandy search, type in menu, and I'm going to just start with one of these, and it should generate a quick preview for me so I can see what it is. Again, this is that core frame that was this master component, as Figma calls it. And so that looks good. And now that I've added it, I have a few options here, so I can, get in and modify a lot of pieces. So right now, I'm just showing the different variants based on the property options. I can add the spec, super powerful to be able to hand off to your engineers. Like, hey, here's the data, the schema behind how we've configured the functionality of our components. And then we have a ton of layout options, right? If you want these to be in a list, so you can put content to the right of them, or you want them to be, left justified. Let's put that back to a grid. So we can do things like, maybe you want to make them full width. Maybe you want to have the background be dark. So we have a lot of different options in terms of how we set these things up to give you opportunity to lay them out as you see fit. And of course, go in, change the components, etc. We also have the ability to get a little more granular. So I'm going to go to a new tab here and show the tiles block. So with the Figma tiles block, this lets me go deeper than just, hey, this kind of spec view of a component and say, let me actually pull out individual assets. So you'll see, again, we're using the Figma conventions. If you have components, they'll show up here. Frames, they'll show up here. Instances as well. And so I can go in if I want to choose maybe an individual asset, like the card. So I could add multiple of these here. This one, maybe I always want to embed a single image. And so I'm going to go ahead and say, hey, this is actually an image. It's seamless. I don't need a description. I want to make it full width. And, maybe I'll then go and put a little text next to it describing it. So again, if teams in the past have had to do, there you go, my demo. If teams are in the past had to do a static image for anything like that, you can now replace those with Figma tiles. But we also have the ability, go add some more tiles below. If I want to go and sort of start to build out maybe specify, oh, very nice, live demos, folks. Network request failed. What I want to do is go in and show you the process as soon as I log back in of adding sort of individual blocks, if you will. And so what that's going to let me do is spec out something that's more granular, right? So you're see if I can get my password right on my television. I did. Cool. Okay. So let's get logged back in here. Love a release day. And we'll get back into that help demo. So love a live demo. Give it a second and back to our branch. Cool. So where were we? We were on the menu. So let's go and build out a little bit more of a detailed view of these components. So, so I might need to reset up my Figma file here. Actually, you know what? I'll just show you what I already have in place. See if oh, there we go. Okay. So if I want to go and add individual tiles, right? I added this one, but I can also add things like, maybe I want to show a few specific button states, right? And I can mix and match what these are. And now I have the ability to say, hey, here are my buttons. I don't have to use the default text here. I can describe them as I want, arch primary, etc. I also have similar controls here, actually even more, where I want to show, hide the properties, show them seamlessly, so you're kind of using them in the UI. Again, full width, grid, lots of flexibility in how you lay them out. All right, so this is just kind of the basics of how can I connect files, build out these assets, build out these examples. To show you a few sort of examples in context, here's an example of something that doesn't exist in code yet. It's probably part of the handoff process. design has made a Figma component. They've put some guidelines together, and then they've added a spec tab. So you can actually add the design source just as a full tab. It'll build this for you and, you know, give you all the variants, give you the properties, give you links to that component in Figma. And so really, again, great thing that you would see attached to something like a Jira ticket, just like this, right? Design's ready. We need to build this out. You know, you'll also see examples where we go a little bit further. So in the button, we have something similar, but we have code connected here. So already in Knapsack, you've been able to build these great dynamic blocks that show you all these variations based on code, right? In this case, a React component, and we're looping over properties and saying, here are all the variants on those different properties, right? If my engineering team updated our React button to have an extra large variation, it would automatically show up here. Now I can do something very similar with my Figma embeds. And here what we've actually done is built essentially a quick preview of here's how this thing looks on the same properties configured in React versus Figma. Clearly doesn't look the same. Here are the property tables. And so we're just starting down this path, but the ability to really bring the data of design together with the data of code, build these comparisons, have those better conversations well before QA. That's really what this is all about, right? And so this is just kind of the tip of the iceberg. We're going to get a little bit more into where we go from here, but let me pause there for Evan, anything you want to add while I catch up on the chat and any questions we have in there?
Nothing right off the bat. I mean, I think that, you know, you're building up towards just the thing that it's really interesting here around the idea of the spec, right? And so you have the button being able to be different sizes there, and like the small, medium, large, and making sure that that is aligned. I think it's super duper powerful, right? I mean, I think that's nice to know, not just for like design and development, but also for content and UX as well. And so just, you know, all of those different props lead into basically all the variations of our components. So super duper powerful, and being able to get them, you know, close to each other side by side really helps getting a lot of consolidation done.
Yeah, absolutely. So, you know, there's just to, well, let's just touch on, you just hinted at some of it, Evan. So let's talk a little bit about what this means for Knapsack in the future, some of the things that we're excited to work on, and then we can open it up for some more questions and Q&A that I see starting to roll in. Evan, do you want to speak to this a little bit?
Oh, I was answering your question in the chat, if that's what you're referring to there.
All good.
Yeah. So, you know, building on some of that spec piece there, you know, I think that it is powerful to be able to see, hey, here is the Figma component. The button can be, you know, small, medium, large. It can be type, you know, primary, secondary, and having, you know, that spec shown. And then likewise with code, being able to point towards a code source and be able to show like the spec that was used, size, small, medium, large, you know, type primary, secondary. I think that would be probably a better step in the right direction to do that first, though, to be able to, you know, basically kind of agree that those are the variations. We're going to have 3 sizes of buttons, not 4 sizes, and, you know, we're going to have you know, rounded true false or something like that. And so I think that being able to start with that spec and then being able to find out when something is, you know, off spec, whether that was in Figma or in code, I think can get kind of interesting. And so I think that that's also like a really good first meeting of a bunch of different disciplines that are all building these things, for example. So I think that that's something that we'd like to be able to pursue a little bit more with this, and also kind of being able to match them up a bit more. You know, Andrew, you had basically displayed the button at small, medium, large, like right next to each other, but being able to have that, you know, done through all the variations and being able to see where there are gaps, I think is also, you know, pretty interesting there. So that's kind of a lot of the stuff here with, you know, being able to bring in the, you know, the rendered result from both Figma and code. The other part that is like coming up as well that we find pretty interesting is really kind of like around theming. And I think that with Figma's a mental model around collections and modes, I think it stands really well when compared with how often, or no, not how often, but how themes get implemented in, you know, in digital mediums like web browsers. They very much, mirror a lot of basically what's happening with like CSS variables. Being able to have, certain regions of your page being able to override it. So for example, kind of like you think about how there is basically like an information density, like cozy or comfortable, and how that affects the spacing and padding. And then, basically something along with like what brand it is. But then you go down to like the footer and you want it to switch over to like an inverted color. So it's not so much like is the page on like light mode or dark mode, but it is about being able to override it in certain like whole sections. And so like that is that's kind of how the web works as well with like CSS variables. And so basically that's what we're building in Knapsack right now, is the ability to have collections and modes and then have that outputted as CSS, and then in the little component like playgrounds and stages that we have, being able to show what happens when a component is large primary button, what happens when you change the information density from like cozy to comfortable, and being able to like see kind of those pieces there. And so yeah, being able to see design choices all the way out to like how a user would experience it, I think is really powerful. And getting that piece of feedback of like, hey, this is how it's experienced in the medium it's destined for. If you get that feedback early, you're going to be able to iterate, tweak, and improve on all of your design choices. So that is quite powerful, and is it something that's coming up very soon for us.
Join next month's webinar to get a deeper preview of that.
Yeah, and I mean, we like also the one with Brad Frost, we'll be chatting about it. I mean, we had kind of a preview chat before he got sick, and just a quick sick, not bad sick, but you know one thing that we've all kind of seen is that the biggest orgs in the world, although even though they're in very different industries, they the way that they theme and that implementation is remarkably similar. Obviously the design choices, like what the hex values are, radically different, and what they name things different, but there's a lot of similarities. So it's being able to have theming with collections and modes is something that has been proven out at some really big orgs as well. And so that's some stuff that we'll be chatting with on that webinar with Brad Frost and myself.
We got a good question in the chat. So let's, we're working on a lot of stuff here, right? Like this is the tip of the iceberg. We're excited to explore more of what we can do with this, align it to the other priorities like theming that we're hearing about. Also want to hear from you, right? We have a roadmap where you can go and contribute, share your thoughts and ideas. We actively monitor that, and it feeds into a lot of our product planning. So please. With that, I want to get into some Q&A. Cameron has a good question that I'm going to send to you, Evan, which is around the actual syntax of the properties, right? So we have, just let me expand this out. Here are the properties that came from Figma, right? Can you talk a little bit about specifically the syntax and where this is generated from based on what happens in Figma?
Yeah, so right in the Figma file, there's basically, they have like the size small, medium, large, where they basically selected all of those and basically built that up. So let's see, if you go into head to the button, and then I think you're going to want to go to like the assets panel.
I don't know if I actually have the right
Yeah,
permission.
it's in pages.
I think I'm in
Yeah,
view.
maybe you don't have it. Oh yeah, you're on view only, so
Let's look on the other
you
ones.
can't jump in there and add an extra large. So yeah, it's determined in there, like in when you're setting up components in Figma, being able to say, hey, this is rounded of booleans, that's true or false, or this is size and it's one of these strings. You're able to declare it there. So I hope that answers your question there. And then it looks like you said more specifically the syntax. There's there is some of that, like size equals large, comma, rounded equals true. That's how Figma does their layer naming when it is basically a component instance. So hope that kind of answers some questions there.
There was a question about Salesforce Lightning, actually, and I may have hopped off the call, but so we have renderers that support a lot of different frameworks, right? When we have things like, here's a component with web components and React and HTML, which they ultimately all get to. And so these are the different renderers we use to essentially render these outputs, React components, web components, the way that a browser would, right? And give you these playgrounds. And so Salesforce Lightning, I don't know if we've ever done a true gap analysis. I don't know if we have anyone actively using Salesforce Lightning, but we've also built custom renders in the past. So always up for a dive into how your components work from a sort of templating standpoint and what we can support.
Yeah, I believe Lightning is all web components. So, and I could be wrong. It's been a bit so I'm taking a closer look at there, but that would be able to be rendered just fine there. So
awesome. So I think that's the bulk of the content that we have for today. Again, this is now available for teams that are out there. You should see this if you're a Knapsack user today in your settings section. So please get in there. We are considering this a soft launch. We're starting to ramp up more of the marketing effort, the polished videos, etc. But you will find we have on our docs.knapsack.cloud, we have the documentation around this. So please, if you're a current customer, get in there, start to use it, give us feedback. We want to hear what's working, what's not, what could be better. We're really excited to get this out and to continue to iterate on it.